Before I ever studied psychology, I lived it through chaos, addiction, and a childhood that taught me more about survival and pain than it ever did about safety and love. My name is Ashley May, and I'm not here today to tell you how I became successful through a linear route of good choices, good grades, and love and support. No, I'm here to tell you how I turned a lifetime of abuse, bad choices, and lessons in pain into a raw and beautiful comeback story that I have chosen to use as the foundation for helping others see the light in themselves and find hope and healing. My journey into psychology didn't start in a classroom. It started in my childhood home, growing up in an environment that was riddled with addiction, mental illness, and chaos. My earliest understanding of human behavior came from trying to decode the unpredictable moods of the people around me as a way to adapt and survive. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of a lifelong pursuit, not just to understand what breaks us, but to eventually find what heals us. Growing up, my father was severely mentally ill, and this was during a time where mental health was deeply stigmatized, a lot more so than it is today, and especially for men. He was largely resistant to any kind of help. Both of my parents struggled with addiction for as long as I can remember. My dad was emotionally explosive and abusive, and my mom was extremely depressed and dismissive. My dad, um, the atmosphere, this resulted in an atmosphere that was filled with brutal fighting, abuse, and neglect, and was extremely unpredictable and chaotic. We moved 23 times before I was 18, all in Salt Lake Valley. It's not like we were moving all over for work. It was because we were constantly being evicted from places due to lack of paying our rent. Stability and safety didn't exist for me. So, as I became a teenager, I myself struggled with substance abuse, starting from the time I was 12 and lasting until I was 24. For over a decade, addiction took pieces of me, my stability, my sense of self, my relationships. By the time I was 24, I had experienced more loss and grief than some people experience in their entire lives. But since then, and for the last 9 years, I've dedicated myself to healing. It has not been an easy journey, and at one point, when I thought I had finally made it, healed, ended up in safety, that too was stripped from me again. I found myself in an abusive marriage that nearly took my life. But it was that relationship that finally led me to truly healing, to learning how to love myself, to hold myself, and to look at my faults not with shame, but with compassion, and to take daily action to make changes. I've learned how to rebuild from the rubble, how to unlearn the pain caused by abuse, and how to work through the devastation of addiction that nearly destroyed everything I had twice. I have truly walked through the hell of addiction and trauma and come out the other side. Not hardened, not like those who have hurt me, but instead with compassion for everyone, with a heart that longs to help others find their way home to themselves, just as I did. Today, I'm on track to graduate with my bachelor's degree in psychology and my license in substance use disorder counseling by May of next year. From there, I plan to earn my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling and specialize as a trauma and addiction recovery therapist. Why this path? Because I know personally and professionally that trauma and addiction often walk hand in hand. You cannot treat one without understanding the other. I want to be the kind of support for others that I never had growing up. The one who sees through the silence, who holds space for pain without flinching, and who walks with people into the fire instead of telling them how to survive it from a distance. I'm also deeply committed to not just clinical work, but furthering the research on trauma-informed care and addiction recovery. I want to challenge outdated narratives that frame addiction solely as a moral failing or a disease. I believe addiction is often a result of a deep disconnection from self, from others, from values, and I want to contribute to a more holistic, compassionate approach that views recovery as reconnection and rewiring, not just abstinence. I've taken a hard, honest look at myself in preparation for this path, my skills, my interests, and my values. I am deeply empathetic, and not just in a feel your feelings kind of way, but in a I've been there and I can sit with you through this kind of way. I have a natural ability to connect with people to make them feel seen, safe, and unjudged. My interest in trauma isn't just academic, it's deeply personal. I'm endlessly curious about how the nervous system stores pain, how the brain rewires for survival, and how healing can be more than just coping. It can be reclamation. I also excel in conflict management and self reflection. I have a gift for helping others work through both interpersonal and interpersonal conflicts in a way that can make them feel safe, supported, and empowered rather than judged. Whether it's navigating relationship struggles or internal battles with shame, I know how to hold a mirror without wounding, and that's a skill I cherish. My values, they center on authenticity, resilience, and transformation. I don't want to help people mask their pain. I want to help them transmute it. I believe that healing is sacred, messy, and nonlinear, and I want to normalize that truth for others. The psychology field is evolving. We're finally beginning to talk more about trauma informed care, the overlap between addiction and post traumatic stress disorder, and the need for culturally competent, empathetic providers who've done their own healing. There's also a growing need for counselors who understand the impact of systemic trauma, childhood adversity, and nervous system dysregulation. Substance use disorder counseling is no longer just abstinence. It's about helping people reclaim their lives, reconnect with their bodies, and rewrite the stories they've been told about who they are. And while some people can go through trauma and come out relatively unscathed, the truth is, not everyone does. Those who've lived through repeated, chronic, or multiple traumas often carry far heavier consequences than those that don't, which can result in substance abuse, mental illnesses, and chronic health problems. Trauma doesn't just touch the surface, it rewires the way a person engages with the world around them in their relationships, in school, at work, and even in treatment. And unless we're looking through a trauma informed lens, we are risking misunderstanding their behavior as resistance instead of what it really is, survival. For many years, there was a serious lack of research exploring the relationship between personality disorders and adverse childhood experiences. But that's starting to change. A longitudinal study published just last year revealed that 90% of individuals diagnosed with personality disorders had experienced adverse childhood experiences. This is not a coincidence. This is a call to action. I want to further investigate and elevate this research and help bring more light to the profound and complex interaction between childhood abuse, neglect, mental health disorders, and substance use disorders. If we want real solutions, we must start where the wound begins. My vision is to become a clinical mental health counselor who guides individuals not just towards coping, but towards reclaiming their lives with clarity, purpose, and self compassion. I want to create a therapeutic space where people feel safe enough to unravel, supported enough to rebuild, and empowered enough to love their lives again. I believe healing is not a straight line, it's a spiral. And my role is not to lead from above, but to work beside. One day, I'd love to create a trauma informed program that blends traditional therapy with body based healing practices, things like somatic experiencing, breath work, and narrative therapy. A space where survivors don't just survive, but learn to feel at home in themselves again. And perhaps just as importantly, I want to be part of the movement to destigmatize mental health disorders and addiction. Because too many people suffer in silence, ashamed of what they're going through, believing their struggles make them weak or broken or define who they are. I want to change that narrative. I want to create space for truth, for rawness, for humanity, to remind people that their symptoms are not character flaws and their pain is not a punchline. We all deserve to be understood, not judged. Um, so, why do I do this work? Because I've lived it, because I know what it's like to feel broken, and I know the courage it takes to begin again when you've lost everything. Because I remember what it felt like to look in the mirror and not recognize myself. Numb, lost, barely surviving. I remember carrying heavy shame that clung to everything I did, convinced I was too damaged to ever be free of the struggle. I remember what it was like to cry out for help and hear silence, to feel like I was the only one in the world carrying the kind of pain I carried. And I remember the moment that I realized I didn't want to just survive anymore. I wanted to live fully, freely, and honestly. And through years of healing, I've learned something sacred. We don't become strong by avoiding pain. We become strong by meeting it, by understanding it, and letting it shape us into something wiser and softer and more real. I've learned that true healing begins when we meet ourselves not with judgment, but with compassion and radical self reflection. I want to be a therapist who doesn't just treat symptoms, but sees the person as a whole, who helps people return to themselves, not the version they had to become to survive, but the version that they were always meant to be, that they deep down inside truly know that they are. I believe we are all born with light, and sometimes life tries to dim that, but healing is how we learn to shine again, not in spite of our pain, but because of how deeply we have felt it. So, yes, I do this work because I know what it means to feel lost, but more than that, I know what it means to come home to yourself again. And I want every person I work with to know that they are not too broken, they are not too far gone, they are not too much, that they are inherently worthy, and that they are whole, and that they can heal. I want to be living proof that healing is not linear, but is undeniably possible. Thank you.